The night my husband threw me out of our house, his entire family was standing in the living room. They believed I had betrayed him. No one asked me to explain. No one wanted to hear my side. I left with one suitcase. I disappeared after that. Years later, the next time we stood in the same room, it wasn't a living room. I had been married to Daniel Hartwell for 7 years. I had cooked in the kitchen of the house we bought together, planted the garden in the backyard, painted the nursery twice in 2 years for 2 babies who filled it with the particular noise of children being raised in a home that felt. Until that Sunday evening in November, like something real, I walked out with a suitcase. One suitcase packed in 12 minutes while my mother-in-law stood in the bedroom doorway to make sure I did not take anything that was not mine, which was a sentence I never imagined would be spoken to me in my own house by a woman who had once held my hand during a difficult pregnancy. I did not take anything that was not mine. I want to say that first. What I took was a change of clothes, my laptop, my social security card, my passport, the photographs of my children that I kept in the nightstand. She stepped forward when I reached for those, and I looked at her until she stepped back, and I put the photographs in the suitcase. And the specific, cold clarity of a woman who has just understood something irreversible about the people she trusted. I did not cry in that house. I cried in the car in the parking lot of a Marriott at 11 o'clock at night, with my suitcase in the back seat and my phone in my lap. And then I stopped and I checked in and I sat on the edge of a hotel bed and I thought about what I was going to do. 4 years later, I walked into a federal courtroom in Raleigh, North Carolina. The Hartwell family was on one side of that courtroom. I was on the other. The accusation came from a woman named Serena Cole. She was 29 years old and she worked in Daniel's department at the commercial property firm where he was a senior manager. I had met her twice, once at the company Christmas party the previous year, where she had been pleasant and unremarkable, and once at a client event where Daniel had introduced her as one of his best analysts. Both times I had thought nothing of her beyond the ordinary thoughts you think about your husband's colleagues at company events. In late October, Serena told Daniel that I had approached her privately and offered her money to provide false performance reviews for 2 of Daniel's competitors at the firm, the other candidates for a partnership position Daniel was pursuing. She said I had done this to help Daniel's chances of being selected. She said I had made the offer in a parking garage near the office on a Wednesday afternoon, and that when she had refused, I had threatened her position at the company. This was completely false. All of it. I had not met Serena Cole in a parking garage on a Wednesday afternoon or any other time. I had not offered her money. I had not threatened anyone. I had not, in 7 years of marriage to a man in a competitive professional environment, done anything to interfere in his career because it had never occurred to me that this was something I needed to do. Daniel believed her. I want to pause on this because it is the thing I have had the most difficulty understanding, even after everything that followed and everything I eventually learned. My husband of 7 years, the man who had watched me give birth to his children, and who knew the texture of my daily life in the specific, intimate way of a person who has shared a life with someone, he heard the accusation and he believed it without asking me to explain. He called me from the office that afternoon and he was cold in a way I had never heard from him, a professional coldness, as if I were a problem he was managing. I need you to tell me what happened with Serena Cole, he said. I don't know who you mean, I said, not because I had forgotten her, but because I genuinely did not understand what she had to do with a phone call in this tone of voice. He told me what she had said. I told him it was false. Every word. I told him I had not been in any parking garage near his office on any Wednesday in October. I told him I could tell him exactly where I had been on every Wednesday in October if he needed to know. He said Serena had provided details, specific ones. She knew what I was wearing. She knew what I had said. I said anyone could describe clothing and invent dialogue. He said she had no reason to lie. I said I had no reason to do what she had accused me of. We went in this circle for 40 minutes on the phone, and at the end of it, he said he needed some time to think, and I said, okay, fine, think, because I trusted that thinking would bring him to the obvious conclusion, which was that his wife of 7 years was telling him the truth. He thought for 3 days. At the end of the 3 days, his family came over for Sunday dinner. The Hartwells are a close family in the way of families that have always had enough. enough money, enough stability, enough social standing that the world has largely confirmed their collective sense of themselves as people whose judgment is sound. Daniel has a mother named Evelyn, a father named Robert, who had largely retired from active opinion by the time I joined the family, two sisters named Claire and Meredith, and an extended network of aunts and cousins and family friends who appeared at holidays and whose names I had learned carefully because learning them had mattered to me. I had been part of this family for 7 years. I had shown up at Thanksgivings with dishes I made from scratch. I had sat through 3-hour Christmas dinners and helped Evelyn with the dishes after. I had driven Claire to the airport at 4 in the morning when she had a flight to catch and her car was in the shop. I had attended both of Meredith's children's birthday parties every year and bought gifts that reflected actual knowledge of what those children liked. I had believed, without examining the belief, that 7 years of this had built something that would hold under pressure. That Sunday evening, I walked into the living room where they were all assembled and understood immediately, from the quality of the silence that greeted me, that the conversation had happened before I arrived. They had discussed it. They had decided. I was walking into a room full of a conclusion. Evelyn was sitting in the armchair she always sat in, with her hands folded and the expression of a woman who has made a difficult decision and has composed herself around it. Claire was on the couch with her arms crossed. Meredith was looking at the floor. Robert was in his chair by the window, looking at the middle distance in the way he looked at things he had decided were not his business. Daniel was standing by the fireplace. He said, without preamble, without any of the marital privacy that should have surrounded a conversation of this magnitude, "I've talked to my family. We think it's best if you leave." I looked at him. I looked at the room. "You've talked to your family," I said. "We believe Serena," Claire said from the couch. She said it with the particular righteousness of someone who has been waiting to say something. "You've never met Serena," I said. "Daniel has known her for 3 years." Claire said, "He trusts her." "He's known me for 10, I said. I tried. I want you to know that I tried, because I think sometimes stories like mine are told in a way that skips over the trying, and the trying matters because it tells you something about who I was and who the people in that room were. I told them I had not been in any parking garage. I told them I could account for my time. I told them I had no motive, that Daniel's partnership was not something I had ever interfered in, that his career was his, that I had my own work and my own professional identity and had never needed to manipulate anything on his behalf. I told them Serena's accusation had specific details that were detailed in the way invented stories are detailed, the kind of specificity that comes from construction rather than memory. Evelyn said that was a very convenient thing to say. I looked at her. Evelyn, who had called me her daughter. Evelyn, who had held my hand in the waiting room when Daniel was in surgery 2 years before, who had sat with me for 4 hours and who had said, when he came out okay, we got through it together. Evelyn was looking at me with the eyes of a woman who had decided I was a stranger. I said, "Evelyn, you have known me for 7 years. You know who I am." She said, "I thought I did." This sentence destroyed something in me that had not been destroyed yet. Not my composure. I still had my composure, but something more fundamental, the load-bearing belief that the people who loved you knew you well enough to stand with you when it mattered. That belief became rubble in the 2 seconds after Evelyn said, "I thought I did." Meredith said nothing the entire time. She looked at the floor and she was quiet. And later, much later, years later, I would understand that Meredith's silence was different from the others, that she was not agreeing so much as she was absent, removed from the proceedings in a way that I would eventually understand the reason for. Daniel said I should go pack a bag. "A bag," I said, "just what you need for now." He said, I looked at my husband in the house we had bought together, surrounded by his family, and I understood that there was no version of this conversation that ended differently. I had no evidence that could compete with what they had decided. I had only my word, and my word had been weighed against Serena Cole's word and found insufficient by the people in this room, and nothing I said was going to change that tonight. I stopped talking. I went upstairs. The packing took 12 minutes. I know this because I was tracking time the way you track time when you are in a state of managed crisis, not anxiously, but with the specific awareness of someone who understands that the next several hours require precision. I packed what I needed. I packed the photographs of my children, My children were at my sister-in-law Meredith's house that evening, ostensibly because it was a school night and the gathering might run late. I had been told this when I arrived, and I had accepted it without suspicion because it was a reasonable thing. I understand now that it had been planned, that they had arranged for the children to be elsewhere before the conversation happened, and that this arrangement had been made by people who had decided the outcome before they saw my face. My children. Lily was 5 and James was 3, and they were at Meredith's house while their mother was being told to leave, and I want to tell you what I felt about this in a way that is honest. I felt something that went far beyond what I felt about anything else that happened that evening. The accusation, the room, Evelyn's eyes, all of that was enormous, and I have not diminished it. But the children were the thing that broke through everything, that made my controlled composure genuinely difficult to maintain. I had to leave without seeing them that night. This was made clear to me, not with cruelty. Daniel was not cruel, I want to say this even now, but with the firmness of someone who had decided how the evening was going to go. He said I would be able to see them, that arrangements would be made, that he was not trying to cut me off from my children. I will tell you that I believed him about this because I had to believe something, and it was the only thing he said that night that I chose to take at face value. I carried my suitcase down the stairs. The family was still in the living room. I walked through it toward the front door, and I felt their silence follow me like a physical thing, the collective weight of their judgment filling the space behind me. I opened the front door. The November air was cold, the particular cold of North Carolina in late fall, and my car was in the driveway. I drove to the Marriott. I checked in. I sat on the edge of the bed. Then I picked up my phone and I called my sister Rachel, who lives in Asheville, and I said, "Something has happened and I need to tell you. But I need you to not say anything until I'm done." She said, "Okay." I told her everything. When I finished, she said, "Tell me what you need." I said, "I don't know yet. Let me think tonight and call you in the morning." She said, "Okay." I turned off the light. I lay in the dark in the Marriott room, and I thought with a precision that surprised me, given what had just happened. I thought about what I knew, what I needed, and what I was going to do. The divorce attorney's name was Susan Park, and she had been practicing family law for 22 years, and she had the specific expression of someone who has heard every version of every story and who evaluates them not on emotional weight, but on the facts they contain. I went to her office 4 days after leaving the house. Once I had slept and eaten and called Rachel and thought and made a list of what I knew and what I needed. I told her what had happened. She asked questions. Good questions, specific ones, the kind that told me she was already thinking about what could be proven and what could not. "Do you have an alibi for the Wednesdays in October?" she said. "Yes," I said. "I was working. I have time records. What's your work?" "I'm a paralegal at a firm downtown." I said, "I've been there for 4 years. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Paralegal," she said. "Family law mostly," I said. "And some contract work." She nodded. Then she said, "Here's what I want you to understand. The accusation is in the context of a marriage dissolution, which means the criminal question of what Serena Cole may or may not have done is separate from the immediate family law questions of custody and marital assets. I want to focus on the family law side first." "I want to focus on both," I said. "I know," she said, "but custody of your children is the most urgent matter." "Let's start there," I agreed. We started there. The following months were the worst of my life, which is a sentence I mean precisely because I am not given to overstatement. The divorce proceedings were contentious in the way that divorce proceedings are contentious when one party has decided the other is guilty of something and uses that conviction as a framework for everything that follows. Daniel's attorneys made arguments about my character, about the accusation, about Serena Cole's claims. I had my alibi. I had my time records. I had the specific dates of every Wednesday in October, documented in the billing system of the law firm where I worked, which showed billable hours on each of those days at times that overlapped with the times Serena claimed I was in a parking garage across town. Susan presented this evidence. The judge reviewed it. The custody arrangement that resulted was what Susan had told me was the best realistic outcome for the initial period. I had the children half the time, with Daniel having them the other half. Not what I wanted. Half of what I wanted, which was all of it, which was what I had had before any of this. I accepted the arrangement because accepting it was the right legal decision, and because I trusted Susan, and because sometimes you take the outcome you can prove over the outcome you deserve. I moved to an apartment in Carey's second floor, 2 bedrooms, one for me and one that I furnished carefully for Lily and James for the nights they were with me. Lily's side with the purple bedspread she had chosen at Target. James's side with the dinosaur lamp I found at a consignment shop, and that he loved with the complete commitment children have for objects they have decided are theirs. Those nights, the nights the children were with me, were the architecture of my survival. I want to say this plainly. I had 2 things in those months, the children and the work was how I paid for the apartment and the purple bedspread and the dinosaur lamp, and the children were why any of it mattered. My colleagues at the law firm knew something had happened in my personal life. I had told my supervising attorney, a patient and exacting man named David Ree, that I was going through a divorce, and that my availability might be occasionally complicated, but that my work would not suffer. He said he was sorry to hear it, and asked if I needed anything, and I said I needed my work to remain exactly as it was, and he said he could provide that. My work did not suffer. The opposite, actually, which is a thing about crisis that is counterintuitive and which I have since learned is not uncommon. When your personal life is in pieces, the professional container becomes load-bearing in a way it has not previously been, and you fill it with the full weight of your attention because attention directed at the work cannot simultaneously be directed at the grief. I became, in those 18 months, better at my job than I had previously been. Not because my job was easy, it had never been easy, but because I was bringing everything to it that I previously distributed across a life that had more spaces to fill. David Ree noticed. He said once in a review meeting, "Whatever is happening in your life right now, I want you to know your work this year has been exceptional." "Thank you," I said. He looked at me for a moment in the way he looks at things he is assessing honestly. "Are you thinking about law school?" he said. I had not been thinking about law school. I had been thinking about custody schedules and grocery lists, and how to explain to a 5-year-old why she had 2 bedrooms now. But I heard the question, and I sat with it for about 10 seconds, and I said, "Tell me what you're thinking." I took the LSAT 14 months after moving into the Carey apartment. I had studied for it on the nights the children were with Daniel, in the particular silence of an apartment that was quiet in a way that was both relief and grief simultaneously, with the practice books spread across the kitchen table and the timer running. I had studied the way I had done everything in those months, with full attention, because partial attention was not something I had access to. You could have partial attention or you could have the LSAT. You could not have both. My score was in the 87th percentile. David Ree wrote me a recommendation letter that I did not read before it was submitted because he sealed it, and which I was told about later by the admissions office in terms that made me sit down for a moment. I was admitted to the UNC School of Law. I want to tell you what it felt like to open that email, because I think it matters. I was in the Carey apartment. The children were with Daniel that night. The dinosaur lamp was off in the quiet room. I opened the email at 11:15 at night after finishing a brief that had taken me 3 days to complete, and I read it twice, and then I put my head down on the kitchen table and I cried in a way I had not allowed myself to cry since the night in the Marriott hotel room. Not from sadness. I want to be precise about this. I cried because the accumulation of the past 14 months, the hotel room, the suitcase, the divorce proceedings, the custody schedule, the LSAT prep at the kitchen table in the quiet apartment, had been moving towards something, and I had believed it was moving towards something, and here was evidence that I had not been wrong to believe it. I called Rachel in Asheville. She screamed into the phone. Then she said, "When do you tell the kids?" "Tomorrow," I said, in language they can understand. "What language is that?" "Mommy is going back to school," I said, "because Mommy is going to be a lawyer." Law school with 2 young children and a custody schedule and the financial structure of a recent divorce is the kind of thing that sounds impossible when you describe it, and that is, in practice, merely the hardest thing you have ever done. I had help. Rachel drove up twice a semester to stay with the children, and a woman in my building named Gloria, who had raised 3 children herself and who had taken a kind interest in us, became the reliable backup when logistics collided. I had David Ree's firm, which took me on as a part-time consultant during the school years, which covered the tuition gap that financial aid did not. I did not have enough sleep. I did not have enough time. I had, every morning, the specific motivation of a person who has something to prove, not to Daniel, not to the Hartwells, not to Serena Cole. To herself, the most important and the most demanding audience, the law student I became is someone I would not entirely have recognized if I had met her in the years before the suitcase. She was precise, she was fast. She had a specific relationship with evidence, what it could prove, what it could not, what the gap between those things looked like in a courtroom, that had been sharpened by her years as a paralegal and honed further by everything that had happened to her personally. She knew, in her body, what it was to be accused without evidence and to need to build a case from what could be documented versus what was simply true. She took a clinic in her second year focused on fraud cases, not family law. She had considered family law and decided against it, because she understood herself well enough to know that the work required more distance from her own history than she currently had. She took the fraud clinic because fraud cases turned on the specific mechanics of what could be proven, and she had been thinking about those mechanics since the night in the living room. She graduated third in her class. The clerkship that followed was with a federal judge named Honorable Patricia Wells, who had been practicing federal law for 30 years and who had the particular quality of a person who had seen enough that very little surprised her and who expected the same of the people who worked for her. I spent New Year's with Judge Wells, and I learned things about the federal court system that I could not have learned anywhere else, including how a case moves from accusation to discovery to trial, and what gets revealed in that movement. After the clerkship, I joined a firm, a mid-sized firm in Raleigh, with a white-collar defense and investigation practice, as an associate. I was 34 years old. I had 2 children in elementary school who called me Mom and called Daniel Dad, and who had adapted to their 2-bedroom life with the resilience of children who are loved consistently by both their parents, which I had made certain was the case regardless of what I felt about the circumstances. I had not spoken to any of the Hartwells, except Daniel in the necessary communications of co-parenting, since the night I left. Not Evelyn, not Claire, not Meredith, whose silence in that living room I had thought about more than the others for reasons I was beginning to understand were significant. I had not thought about Serena Cole every day. I want to say this clearly because I did not want her living in my head rent-free for 4 years. I had thought about her in the specific, bounded way that I thought about an unresolved problem. The way you think about something you have set aside because the timing is not right, not because you have forgotten it. The timing was about to change. Lily was 9. James was 7. They were in the years of childhood where they were becoming people. Specific, funny, opinionated people whose individual personalities were emerging in ways I found endlessly interesting. Lily had my determination, which I recognized in her with a combination of pride and sympathy. James had Daniel's easiness, the quality of moving through the world without friction, which was a gift, and which I hoped would serve him better than it had served his father. I had an apartment still, though bigger now, on the second floor of a building in downtown Raleigh that I had chosen for the walkability and the light and the proximity to the firm where I worked. I had furniture I had chosen with the specific pleasure of someone who has lived in a practical space for long enough that choosing something for beauty felt like a real luxury. I had a life that was mine in the complete sense. The lease, the furniture, the salary that covered it, the name on all the paperwork. I had also, over the previous year, been noticing something in my professional capacity that had started as a small observation and had grown, with the accumulation of additional information, into something I could not continue to observe from the outside. A pattern in a set of cases that had come across my desk. A name that had appeared in 2 separate matters, in 2 separate contexts, in a way that seemed coincidental and was not. Serena Cole had not been still in the 4 years since she accused me of something I did not do. She had been busy, Chapter 11, an unexpected case. The first case that crossed my desk was a wrongful termination claim. A woman named Andrea Simmons had been fired from a commercial real estate firm in Raleigh, not the firm where Daniel worked, a different firm, a competitor, after a colleague named Serena Cole had accused her of sharing proprietary client information with a rival company. The accusation had been made internally, investigated briefly, and acted upon before Andrea had been given the full opportunity to respond. She had been escorted from the building with a box of her belongings and a separation agreement she had not yet signed. She came to our firm for help. I was not her primary attorney. That was my colleague James Whitfield, a methodical and thorough man who had been practicing employment law for 15 years. But I was assigned to the file for support on the fraud aspects of the case, because the question of whether Serena's accusation to management had been deliberately false, not merely mistaken, was central to the damages calculation. I read the file. I read Serena Cole's name. I sat with it for approximately 30 seconds, and then I went to James Whitfield's office and I said, "I have to tell you something about this case before we go further." He looked at me. "Tell me." I told him about my own history with Serena Cole. Everything, the accusation, the divorce, the living room, the alibi, all of it. I told him with the same precision I used to tell him about any factual matter, because the facts were what mattered, and my feelings about the facts were not his business. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Do you think you can be objective on this file?" "I think I am uniquely suited to be objective on this file," I said, "because I know exactly what a fabricated accusation from this woman looks like, and I know how to document the gap between what she says happened and what actually happened." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to run this by the partners." The partners, after a conversation I was not present for, agreed I could stay on the file with appropriate oversight. They understood what I had brought to them, which was not a conflict of interest but its opposite, first-hand knowledge of the person at the center of the case and the specific pattern of her behavior. I began my research. Within 2 weeks, working through discovery documents and the records our investigator had begun to compile, I found the second case. A man named Thomas Riley had left a firm 4 years ago under circumstances that had never fully made sense to his former colleagues. A sudden departure, an accusation he had refused to discuss, a settlement agreement with a non-disclosure clause that had prevented the story from being told. Thomas Riley's name appeared in documents that also contained Serena Cole's name. The timing placed them at the same firm in the same month. I found a third case, then a fourth. Serena Cole had been doing this for at least 6 years. I was case number 1. The federal investigation was opened by the U.S. Attorney's Office after our firm provided a structured presentation of the pattern we had documented. I will not bore you with the procedural details of how an investigation becomes a case and how a case becomes a federal prosecution, because the details are less important than the fact that it happened. What is important is that Serena Cole had been running a scheme. She had identified professionals at competitive firms, people in positions where removing them would benefit someone, and she had fabricated accusations against them. In some cases, the benefit had been financial. She had been paid by parties who stood to gain from the target's removal. In others, the motivation had been personal advancement, eliminating competitors for positions she or her associates wanted. The accusation she had made against me had been the first iteration of what became, over the following years, a refined and repeated method. She was good at it. She understood what details made an accusation credible. She understood how to select targets whose personal circumstances made them vulnerable. A marriage where trust had fractured lines, a professional environment where reputations were fragile, a family structure where the target support system could be mobilized against them. She had identified all of these things in me 7 years ago in a parking garage accusation she had constructed from whole cloth, and she had been right about how it would work. She had not been right that it would be permanent. The federal hearing was in the 4th week of October. I walked into the courthouse on a morning that was cold in the particular way North Carolina mornings are cold in late fall. In the suit I had chosen carefully, with the file I had spent 6 months building under my arm. I had been here before, in this building, in this capacity, in the specific role of attorney, but not in this case, and not with these facts. The Hartwell family was in the gallery. I had known this was possible. The case had received local press coverage. The scheme that Serena Cole had run had eventually implicated individuals connected to multiple firms in Raleigh's commercial real estate world, and Daniel's firm was one of them. Daniel had been subpoenaed. He was in the gallery with Claire beside him. Evelyn was there. Meredith was there too. She was sitting slightly apart from the rest of the family, in the end seat of a row, in the way of someone who has been maintaining a particular distance for reasons of her own. I walked to the attorney's table. I sat down. I arranged my materials. I was aware of the gallery the way you are aware of things in your peripheral vision. Present, registered, not the thing you are focusing on. The hearing began. What the federal investigation had uncovered and what began to emerge in the formal proceedings was a record of communications between Serena Cole and a man named Bradley Hatch. Bradley Hatch was a senior partner at Daniel's firm. He had been in competition with Daniel for a senior partnership position, the same position that Serena's accusation had been framed around. He had retained Serena Cole's services, the investigation had found, to produce an accusation against Daniel's wife that would destabilize Daniel sufficiently to remove him from effective competition. He had paid her. There were bank records. There were emails, the kind that people write when they believe they are being careful and are not careful enough, the kind that survive even when the sender believes they have been deleted. The investigation also found something else. It found evidence that Serena Cole had been in contact with a member of the Hartwell family in the weeks before the accusation, someone who had provided information about the family's structure, about the dynamics of Daniel's marriage, about the specific vulnerabilities that Serena had exploited in constructing her story. The family member who had been in contact with Serena Cole was Claire. Claire had not known the full scope of what Serena was doing. The investigation was careful to establish this, and I believe it to be true. She had not known that Serena was a professional fabricator being paid by Bradley Hatch, but she had known Serena through a social connection, and she had provided information about me, about Daniel's marriage, about the tensions in our household that Claire had perceived during 7 years of family gatherings, that Serena had used to construct an accusation specific enough to be credible. Whether Claire had understood what her information would be used for was a question the investigation could not fully answer. What it could establish was that the accusation had been built partly from information about me that had come from inside the family. I read this finding in the investigation report before the hearing. I sat with it for a long time. Claire had not set out to destroy me. I believe this. She had been manipulated by someone who was skilled at manipulation, who had approached her in a way that felt like ordinary conversation and had extracted what she needed. But she had also, in that living room, been among the most certain of my guilt. She had been the one who said, "We believe Serena," with the particular confidence of someone who had no doubt. She had had no doubt because she had helped build the accusation. She had recognized in Serena's story the details she herself had provided, and she had interpreted her recognition as confirmation. There was a recess after the morning session of the hearing. I stepped into the hallway with my co-counsel, and we conferred briefly on the afternoon presentation. When I turned around, Daniel was standing at the end of the hallway. He had aged in a way that was more than 4 years. Not badly. He was not diminished, not defeated, but older in the way of someone who has carried something heavy for a long time and who now understands the full weight of it. He said my name. I said his. He said, "I need to say something." "You don't need to say anything," I said. "We're in the middle of a proceeding." "I know," he said, "but I need to say this before it goes further." He stopped. "I should have believed you." I looked at him in the courthouse hallway with the proceedings going on behind the closed door and 4 years of the life we had each built separately, and I thought about what I wanted to say. "Yes," I said, "you should have. I have been." He stopped again. "There is nothing I can say that covers what I did to you." "No," I said, "there isn't." I paused. "What I want you to understand is that what I'm doing in there is not about you. It is not about getting back something that was taken from me. It is about Serena Cole and what she did to me and to the other people we've documented. The consequences of this case fall where they fall, and they should fall on her." "What about Claire?" he said. This was the question I had thought about the most. In the weeks since the investigation report had identified Claire's role, "Claire will have to answer the questions she's asked," I said. "The scope of what she knew is a question for the investigation. My scope is the case I'm presenting." He nodded. He looked at me with an expression I recognized as something between grief and respect, the particular combination that arrives when you understand you are looking at someone you underestimated. "The kids," he said. "I want to." He stopped. "The kids are fine," I said. "They are always fine. We have both made sure of that." "I know," he said. I heard my co-counsel behind me, the signal that the recess was ending. "I need to go back in," I said. He nodded. I walked back through the door and took my seat, and I did not look at the gallery, and I opened my file and I was ready. Evelyn found me after the hearing. She was waiting outside, standing apart from the rest of the family in the particular posture of a woman who has made a decision and is waiting to execute it. She said, "May I speak with you?" I looked at her. Evelyn, in her good coat, with the expression that was not the expression from the living room, not the decided, closed expression of a woman who had made up her mind, something more uncertain, something that had been worked on. Yes, I said. She said, I owe you an apology that cannot cover what it needs to cover. I know that. I stood in the bedroom doorway of your house, and I watched you pack a bag, and I did not say a single word in your defense. And I have thought about that every week for 4 years. I was quiet. What Serena did, she said. What Bradley Hatch did. What Claire, she stopped. You deserved better from all of us. You deserve better from me. Yes, I said. I did. She looked at me with the specific difficulty of a woman who has rehearsed something and is now living in the gap between rehearsal and reality. I don't know what I'm asking for, she said. I don't think I'm asking for anything. I think I just needed to say it to your face. Okay, I said. I heard you. I did not tell her it was all right because it was not all right, and I was not going to perform forgiveness I had not arrived at. But I did not tell her it was unforgivable either, because I did not know that yet, and I was someone who had learned over 4 years not to make decisions about things she did not yet know. I walked to my car. I sat in it for a moment. I thought about Lily and James, who were at school, who would be home with me this evening, who would want dinner and would have things to tell me about their day that I would listen to with genuine interest because they were the most interesting people I knew. I started the car. Serena Cole pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges 4 months after the hearing. Bradley Hatch was convicted after a trial I did not personally try. I had played my role in the investigation and the building of the case, and the trial itself was handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office, with our firm in a supporting capacity. The sentencing happened on a Thursday in April. I did not attend. I was in my office working on a different case, because the sentencing was not about me and never had been, and I had other things to do. My assistant sent me a text message when the news came through. I looked at it. I put my phone down. I went back to work. I have been asked, in the years since, how I feel about what happened. People want a satisfying emotional answer, vindication, triumph, the particular glow of someone who was wronged and was proven right. I understand why they want this. It is the most satisfying version of the story. Here is the honest version. I do not feel triumphant. I feel resolved. These are different things. Triumph suggests that there was a competition, that someone won and someone lost, and while that is technically true, Serena Cole lost, I won, it is not the frame that feels accurate to my experience. What I feel is the specific piece of someone who did the work that needed to be done, and who can now turn her full attention to the things that matter. The things that matter are the following, in no particular order. Lily, who is 13 now and who wants to be an architect and who already draws plans for imaginary buildings in her sketchbooks with a precision that makes me proud in the specific way you are proud of someone who has found their thing. James, who is 11 and who is going to be fine in whatever he does because he has the quality of person who is fine, who moves through the world without unnecessary friction, and who calls me every night he is at his father's house to tell me one thing that happened that day. The work which is real and which matters and which I am good at in a way that I earned through specific hard years of specific hard effort. The apartment in downtown Raleigh, with the furniture I chose for beauty and the light I chose the building for and my name on every piece of paperwork. Daniel and I have a functional and respectful co-parenting relationship. We are not friends. We are the parents of 2 people who are being raised to be good, and that is what we are to each other. And it is sufficient. Evelyn sent me a card last Christmas. A simple card, a short note inside. She said she thought about me and hoped the children were well. She did not ask for anything. I read it and I put it on the kitchen counter for a day and then I put it in the drawer and I have not thrown it away. I am not sure what I am going to do with it. I have time to decide. Rachel, who screamed into the phone when I was admitted to law school, is coming to visit next month. We are going to eat at the restaurant near my building that I have been telling her about. And I am going to introduce her to Gloria from my building. And we are going to be 2 sisters having dinner, which is ordinary and which is the most extraordinary thing I know. Here is what I want to tell you because I have been working my way toward it, and I want to say it directly. The night I walked out of that house with a suitcase, I was 30 years old and I had $43 in my checking account and 2 children I could not reach, and a family that had decided I was someone I was not. I was that woman, and I want you to know that she was not weak. She was not broken. She was a woman in a difficult situation who understood, standing in the November air with her suitcase in the driveway, that what happened next was going to depend entirely on what she decided to do. She decided to do something. She did it carefully, and she did it consistently, and she did not do it dramatically. And the accumulation of careful, consistent, undramatic decisions is what produced the woman who walked into a federal courthouse 4 years later with a file she had spent 6 months building and a case she was going to win. The people who stand in living rooms and decide who someone is without asking them to speak, they are operating on incomplete information. They will always be operating on incomplete information because they have decided before looking, and deciding before looking means you miss the evidence. I am the evidence they missed, and I have had, in the 4 years since that courtroom, the specific satisfaction of a woman who knows exactly who she is and who built herself piece by piece from what was left after everything else was taken, and who would not trade the person she became for the easier version of the story. Not for anything, not for a single thing.